So welcome everyone. I have switched on the recording. So this webinar will be recorded and I'm going to make that available for people who ask for it. We will be also processing it into a video to go onto our YouTube channel. So we have many videos on there about the SQE and QWE. So perhaps what I should do is share my screen and show you that there. So there's our YouTube channel. And you can see past webinars and also short videos about the SQE and QWE and exemptions on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to have a look at that. It's free, obviously, and subscribe. So what I'm going to do now is map out what we're going to be covering this evening. And thank you for being on time. So what I'm going to be doing, first of all, is talking about what the SQE is, what makes up the SQE, and we'll then be looking in a bit more detail about the qualifying work experience and then go through exemptions. That'll take about half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. And then we'll move over to a Q&A session. That's the normal pattern for these webinars that I've been giving. But we have a guest with us tonight. So AK, who has qualified as a solicitor, but she was previously and is still qualified as an Indian lawyer. And so she's gone through the process of qualifying, sitting the exams and such like, but also we helped her through obtaining an exemption from the SQE2 exam. So she very kindly agreed to join us, and I'll ask her to talk a little bit after me about her experience going through the exams and getting the exemption. So it'll be fantastic I'm sure, for you to hear that firsthand rather than hearing me wittering on about things. Okay, so as I'm talking, I will be sharing my screen and taking you through various visual aids. If you have questions as we're going through, then please put them into the chat and I'll work through that during the Q&A at the end. If anyone has joined recently, please keep yourselves on silent so that you're not talking across what I'm trying to say and what AK is saying in due course as well. So first, a little bit about me. My name's Ingemar Hunnings. I am a solicitor, qualified in 1990, not through the SQE, of course, therefore. So I spent 24 years in private practice. I was an equity partner for 14 years. I ran a department of 60 staff. I sat on the board. My firm had about 230 staff when I was there. 2013, I stepped out of the equity and then set up Hunnings Consultancy, which is a management consultancy helping businesses in the legal services sector and some in-house teams as well, and some other businesses, but with the business of running their business. Okay. So this is where I'm going to start sharing my screen. And the first thing is just to take you to our website. So there's a lot of resource on here through the blog. This is us. Okay. And we help with case management systems. You can see here, Lead, Clio, Action Step, and Support, Proclaim. So we support firms using those, either with implementation, training, and assistance. I'll come back to the QWE and SQE. We do a lot of compliance work, and this can stretch outside of law firms into in-house legal or other businesses, data protection, GDPR, AML, sanctions, training, and such like. General consulting, which goes into business consulting, business coaching, and some of the quality marks like Nextel, CQS, and such like, financial management, and what have you. There's a team of about 10 of us in there. And then finally, if you break it down into these 4 sections, we do a lot of work around the SQE and QWE, acting as external confirming solicitors for people who don't have a solicitor to confirm their QWE, helping people through applications for exemptions from SQE, and you can see here, so ID verification if people need that. Okay, so that's a little bit about me and our business. Going to move on now to the SQE and start to explain that. So I'm going to use this, first of all, as an aid. So there are 4 elements to the SQE, which I've set out here. But what is the SQE? So, Solicitor's Qualification Exam. This is taking over from the LPC, legal practice course as the way to qualify as a solicitor of England and Wales. Scotland has a separate jurisdiction, as does Northern Ireland. So specifically England and Wales. There is no UK qualification. It's jurisdictional. So the SQE came in September 2021, and we're in and a good way through the transitional period with the LPC being phased out. For foreign qualified lawyers, before the SQE came in, there was a route called the QLTS as a way of qualifying. That stopped when the SQE came in. Okay, so the idea with the SQE is that now one single exam is sat by, or one single route is followed by everyone who wants to qualify as a solicitor of England and Wales. Under the LPC, different training organizations marked their own homework for the LPC, and then people had to try and get a training contract with a law firm. This had many problems, that it restricted access, and if you couldn't get a training contract, you couldn't qualify unless you followed some one or two very specific alternative routes, which were tough. So the idea of the SQE is it makes it more accessible, and you control much more your route to qualification, your career. Okay. So these are the elements that you need to have in mind for the SQE. You have to have a degree or degree equivalent. Under the LPC, it had to be a law degree. It doesn't have to be a law degree under the SQE. It needs to be a degree or degree equivalent. Now, there's an organization, well, the SRA uses, I think it's Atlantic Data, which can compare qualifications and tell you whether it is accepted as a degree equivalent. There is no longer any requirement for you to do a GDL, a converter course. So you could have done a degree in geography and then sit the SQE exams. Now, that might be harder for you, but you're not forced to sit a converter course. And if people are telling you that you have to do, that's them commercially saying that, not the SRA. Okay? So all you need is a degree or degree equivalent from anywhere. Now, the exams, you have to sit and pass the exams, the SQE1 and the SQE2, unless exemptions apply. You need to have 2 years full-time equivalent qualifying work experience confirmed to the SRA by an SRA regulated solicitor. And then the usual thing at the end of proving your identity and such like, which I'm not really going to talk about very much because that's between you and the SRA. Although, as you saw, we can help. I'm a solicitor, so I can go through the verification. They use Atlantic Data for that. Right, let's talk about the exams next. Okay, so I'm using various blogs and pages from our website because there's so much information I put up here. You can access, I've written it out here, and it's an 8 memoir. And what I will do tomorrow is put up onto LinkedIn a post with the links to the various resources that I'm showing here. So there is, if you search on what is the SQE exam on our website in here, you'll see there's a page on it. So let's use this. SQE. There are 2 exams, the SQE1 and the SQE2, imaginative names, hey? So the SQE1 is made up of 2 exams, and you may hear them referred to as the FLT, functioning legal knowledge. So each of them are 180 multiple choice questions, so they're multiple choice exams, 10 hours of exam time. Part of the challenge is the shortness of time to answer the questions. The exams are tough. They're testing you in these areas of law. Don't ask me why it doesn't cover family law. I have no idea, can't understand that. I have asked the SRA, they have ignored me. It also doesn't cover immigration law, but there we go. The exams are tough. Generally, of the people sitting the SQE1, about 55% pass. Okay, so a little tougher than the LPC. Where do you sit them? Well, they're sat in exam centers, which you can sit around the world. The SRA uses the Pearson VUE test centers, as it shows here. There's a page on here. You can go and have a look at the SRA page here that I've put a link through to. You can go to, there's a Pearson VUE search center, a test center search tool there, which you can use to try and see if there's something relatively close to you. Okay. So the SQE1 exams sat in these test centres. In the UK, these centres are also used for driving tests as well, the theory tests for that. So that's the SQE1 exams. You can only apply to sit the SQE2 exam once you have passed the SQE1. Unless, of course, you've got an exemption from SQE1. I'll talk about the exemptions a little bit later. SQE2, it's made up of 16 written and oral tests. Okay, 14 hours of exam time. There are 12 written and 4 oral. The written ones, I believe you can now sit through the Pearson VUE centres, but you still have to travel to the UK for the oral ones. And the test centres are Cardiff, Manchester, and London, as far as I'm aware. So it's a combination of your knowledge, so the law, again, but also your skills. They're looking at you not to the level of the LPC, which was, could you start your training contract, but rather they're looking at you as if you were newly qualified. Are you a safe pair of hands to let loose on the public? So the level of the exam is different. Now, generally speaking, all the people who sit the SQE2, about 77% pass. So remember, those are people who have already passed or been exempted from the SQE1. So yeah, there we go. And the qualifying work experience, which I'll talk about a little bit later, effectively is preparation for the SQE2, because you're thinking about these soft skills that the examiners are looking out for you exhibiting during the SQE2. Now, the SQE2 exam, 4 oral tests, and I think, well, I've certainly heard of people who have found the oral one in court, where you're in a real court scenario, quite tough, because the judge will interrupt you, the client doesn't cooperate, and things like this. So yeah, be prepared. They want to see what you're really like operating as a solicitor. Okay. So those are the exams. Prices, what they charge for them is, I need to update this, I guess, 23, 24, I need to put 24, 25. Check with the SRA. You apply for these through your My SRA profile. The exams are currently administered by Kaplan. Okay. People ask me, can I recommend anyone to train? I can't. A, because I've not sat the exams myself. B, because any view that I had would be very subjective. C, because there is no empirical data as to which one does better. The SRA hasn't released that, and it would be very difficult to make it academically robust. But I have put here a page where I have listed those training providers that I'm aware of with a little bit of information linked to their websites and an indication of the price that they charge, as far as I can tell, which obviously you'll need to update and check from their website. I would point out the QLTS does have some quite usefully well-regarded mock tests, which you can link through to on there as well. There is a link to the SRA website where it has a pure list, but it's just a list. So I hope that is also of help there. Okay. So just going back to the elements, we just looked at the exams. Let me now move on to the QWE, and then I'll move on to exemptions and then on to apprenticeships. So qualifying work experience. What is that? Under the LPC, you had to try and get a training contract with a law firm. Some law firms are still calling the QWE a training contract. Under the LPC, training contract meant something specific within the SRA framework. Under the SQE, training contract means nothing more than just the ordinary English language. It has no meaning to the SRA under the SQE. Under the LPC, the training contract could only be provided by a law firm that was verified and licensed by the SRA to provide a training contract, and the law firm decided, the solicitor's firm decided whether you qualified. Under the SQE, they have no say as to whether you qualify unless they're telling the SRA that you are wholly unsuitable for some reason. You acquire 2 years full-time qualifying work experience, which needs to be confirmed to the SRA by an SRA-regulated solicitor. You could have acquired that before you even started work at a law firm. Your paralegal work can be qualifying work experience. The law firm can find you qualifying to their great surprise. You walk in one day and say, look, I've just got my SQE2 results. I've applied. I already had my QWE confirmed. I'm now newly qualified. Can I have a pay rise, please? And they go, what? You control, therefore, your progress through to qualifying. So what is qualifying work experience? It is the provision of legal services. It does not have to be done in a law firm. It does not have to be done in English and Welsh law. It does not have to be done in England and Wales. It could be voluntary. You can reach back in time as far as you want for your QWE. You can also reach out to an external solicitor to have your QWE confirmed. And that's a service that we provide to enable people still to move forward. So no longer are you controlled by the law firms. And the provision of legal services is much broader than just working in a law firm. It's not the provision of administrative services. It's not the provision of business services or the provision of financial services. The SRA is very careful not to restrictively define it, nor do they define what full-time is. So full-time equivalent. So you can be doing part-time, or you could be doing full-time, but only part of your time is the provision of legal services. Let me give you an example. Working for a charity like the Citizens Advice, an advice centre, and you may find that part of your time is giving debt advice. In my view, and my view only counts if I'm doing the confirmation to the SRA, in my view, debt advice is the provision of financial services. But if you're giving advice on housing law, then it's closely related to the law. That would be the provision of legal services and would be QWE. So if you're doing 50% housing advice, 50% debt advice, then it would take you 4 years to get your 2 years full-time equivalent, assuming you're working full-time, even if volunteering full-time. So I'm not going to go into more specifics on that because it tends to be person-specific to their situation. But if it is an external solicitor who's doing the confirmation, the SRA requires them to do more in their confirmation. Okay? The SRA requires us to confirm that we have reviewed the work. So in my opinion, the English language means reviewing, means going through and seeing the work. And it requires us to confirm that we have got feedback from the supervisor of the aspiring solicitor. Okay? The supervisor does not have to be a lawyer, okay? They just have to be the supervisor. So the threshold is much, much lower, for qualifying work experience. The SRA wants people to have had the opportunity to and exhibit those soft skills that they have acquired. And the SRA has set out 18 skills, and I'm not going to go through those now, but the idea is that you are acquiring those soft skills that turns you from someone who knows lots of law into someone who is an effective solicitor. And those are the sorts of things, as I said, the SRA will be looking out for you exhibiting in the SQE2 exam. Okay, so I've talked quite a bit about the qualifying work experience. I'll do exemptions first, and then I'll talk about apprenticeships, okay? So exemptions first. SQE1, can you get exemption from the SQE1 exam? You can. The most obvious one and the simplest way to do it is if you have already passed the LPC. So the old route, and you're effectively jumping across to now wanting to qualify through the new existing route, the SQE. So you can trade your LPC pass in against an SQE1 exemption. And it's very simple. You upload proof of it through your MySRA profile, and you get a tick next to the SQE1. It is possible for you to fill in a form, an application form. Effectively, it's like equivalent means where you produce a huge dossier of evidence to say that you've got experience across lots of areas of law to quite a detailed level, and then you can apply for exemption from the SQE1 because of that. The SRA told me recently they've only ever granted that to one person. So yeah, chances of success low. SQE2 exemptions. You can only apply for an exemption from the SQE2 exam if you are already qualified as a lawyer somewhere. So if you're not, if you're a paralegal, can't apply for exemption from SQE2. Now, If you want to apply for exemption from the SQE2, you use this form. Okay. And we have on our website, as you know, here, this service that we provide with lots of information that we put up. Okay. So let's go to that. And I try and set it all out to help you with how you can apply for your exemption from the SQE2, and it's all there. But I'll summarize that now. There's the form you can download. Of course, you can download it from the SRA website, and there's further guidance here. Let me now just summarize this for you. Okay. So you would fill in, if you're applying for exemption from SQE2, section 1 as to who you are, section 2 about the practice areas, the practice rights that you're given through your qualification. So if you don't have all of those, there's extra stuff you have to do. I'll cover that in a moment. But hopefully your qualification gives you practice rights to say yes to all of these areas. Section 3 is all about your ethics. Hopefully, yes, you're ethical and you do all those things. Section 4. Now let me talk about these. Section 4A is agreed exemptions. Some few jurisdictions the SRA has had a look at, and they had pre-agreed an exemption. All you have to do is ask for it. So you would fill this in up to this point, tick, and submit the form with your fee, £265 currently, and they will grant you the exemption. Obviously, you'd want to upload proof of your qualification, job done. But there's only a few countries that have agreed exemptions. A place where you can check that is here, SRA website, and it's all about SQE exemptions. And there's something on here where you can select your jurisdiction. So if we were to pick Brazil, you'll see has an agreed exemption. Okay, easy. Botswana, no, it doesn't. So that it gives you clearer guidance about what you would have to do. Let's go back to the form. If you are not the beneficiary of an agreed exemption, you have to go through 4B, new exemptions. You fill in the information. The form is not really helpful because if you need to put more than one organization, it doesn't expand. So you've got to try and squish it in there as well. And then you go for exemption SQE2. This is where you could try to get exemption from the SQE1. This route, yeah, as I said, only one person has been granted that so far since 2021. So your chances aren't great. Is SQE2 here? I don't think anyone has been granted that. So it's SQE2 we're looking at. So what that means is you're skipping over, great news, sections 5 and 6, all of this stuff that otherwise you'd be filling in if you're trying to get an exemption from SQE1, and you're straight on to section 7. Let me explain ABC. This is applying for exemption from the SQE2. So as a qualified lawyer, you have legal work experience. The SRA wants you to have 2 years, okay? 2 years because of your qualification. Now, it might be that your 2 years legal work experience is a mandatory part of your qualification, for example, South Africa, in which case your qualification proves it, tick that, and they can just check with South Africa and probably grant you the exemption. Some people, many people, it's all post-qualification, so you have to be filling this in. Other people, it's a combination. Let's say Pakistan. 6 months is a mandatory part of your qualification, and 18 months then is required by the SRA post-qualification. So there'll be a mixture of those. In addition, for 7B and 7C, you need to prove this. Now, you would need to prove this, A, by submitting with the application form proof of your qualification, certificate of good standing, or most easily proof of your qualification, your certificate of qualification, whatever. And the other thing you need to provide is a reference letter from someone who directly supervised your legal work experience post-qualification, okay? And there are specific requirements the SRA wants in that letter of reference, and you need to have a letter of reference for each period that makes up your remaining requirement, whether that's 2 years or 18 months or what have you. So let's say if it was 18 months, one of it was for 12 months and one of it was for 6 months, then you would need to have 2 letters of recommendation, one from each of the people who directly supervised you. Okay. And we do help people with the drafting of that and reviewing, giving you a simple template and just checking the application and such like. Okay. Now, Section 8, what is Section 8 about? Section 8 is for those people who don't yet have the required period of time. And because you have to do a lot of work for Section 8, I would just say carry on working until you've got the required period of time. Or Section 8 is for those people whose qualification does not enable them to say yes to all of the, if I can get there, Section 2 practice rights. All right, there they are. Or more easily, I put them out here. These are the practice rights. If your qualification, for example, doesn't give you the right to do criminal law or civil litigation fully, then I'm afraid you will be fitting in Section 8. We don't help people with applications including Section 8. We do if it's only Section 7. So I've gone into some detail on there. I hope that is of help for you with regards to applying for exemptions from the SQE2 exam. Right. I'm going to also now talk about apprenticeships. Okay. For people who are resident in England, there is something called the Apprenticeship Scheme, which is funded through taxes on larger organizations, the apprenticeship levy. And what it means is those people who are on the apprenticeship scheme, their study fees and their exam fees are covered. Okay, so they don't have to pay them. Huge financial saving. Now, the SQE exams were designed specifically to fit within the apprenticeship scheme. The apprenticeship scheme has been running for decades, and lots of people go through that, bricklayers, electricians, carpenters, all sorts. But for the first time, it's open to lawyers. And you can join as a graduate if you're resident in England, okay? And it would be your employer who puts you on as an apprentice. They would need to approach those organizations which are on the government-approved apprenticeship training list, and then they would take the employer through what needs to be done. You would be an employee of them. They would have to release you for a day a week to do your study. So it would take you longer to get your QWE, but the benefit to you, of course, is you have financially you don't have to pay the exam study, the tuition and the exam costs. Okay. Anecdotally, the SRO said that people who've gone through as apprentices tend to have a slightly higher success rate in the exams. There is a lot of information on here. You can, where have I put it in here, approach the apprenticeship service. It's in here somewhere. I put the phone number and such like. So yeah, there we go. Very helpful people. It would be more you doing some research, maybe referring your employers to this and see whether they can take benefit of that. Many people have. They're putting a lot of people through apprenticeships. The Labour government has given notice that they may be withdrawing the ability for graduates to join as graduates for this, saying really that we want to focus our money on the less well-off to help them through this. There's logic to that. But anyway, apprenticeships, something that many people overlook, can be really helpful for people going through this process. So there we go. I wanted to cover that. Now, having gone through and explained, I believe, the SQE, what it is, and exemptions, or one thing I should say about exemptions, if you are a qualified lawyer, you are automatically exempted from the SQE2 requirement. Full stop, period. Okay? So that's the other exemption you should be aware of. I'm now going to hand over to AK just to explain to you, share with you her experience of going through qualifying through the SQE and also applying for an exemption from the SQE2 exam.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ingemar. I think that was so informative. And I just seeing all of that again has brought back so many memories going through the qualification process. And I'm glad I'm over it. So a quick introduction about myself. So I'm Akanksha, or AK. I am currently a senior legal counsel in a London-based company, looking at all corporate and compliance and commercial bits. So a little bit about myself. So I am an England qualified lawyer. I recently qualified as a solicitor of England and Wales. I passed my SQE1, and then, of course, Ingemar and his firm helped me through the SQE2 exemption route. I think personally for me, I didn't have a agreed exemption because of my Indian qualification. I had to apply for an individual exemption, which was then assessed by the FRA on a case-by-case basis. So I did have to fill the form 4B. And I think, Ingemar, you went quite into detail with that form, which is very, very useful for some of us who see it for them. I think once that form was filled out, it was about getting a letter of reference, evidencing the 2 years of work experience which I had. So fortunately, I had been working in my current organization for 2 years, but this was again an in-house work experience. And like Ingemar said, you don't need to have a training contract at a law firm. You don't need to have been working in a law firm to apply for that. So I had my CEO, in fact, be a reference for me in my application, which is again something I wasn't very sure about when I was doing the application, because in my mind, I thought, okay, I need a solicitor to qualify to sign this off. But thankfully, Ingemar reached out to the SRA and literally showed me a screenshot where the SRA confirmed to him that it doesn't need to be someone with a legal qualification, which is again very reassuring. So I went through that process. Again, being an Indian qualified solicitor living in the UK, I had to jump through a couple of hoops, getting my police verification over the line, getting a certificate of good standing. And that can take quite a while. Again, I think there are a few more checklist documents you need to submit, like your English language competency certificate and a couple of other bits. I think all in all, it took me around 6 months to get a response from the SRA. And like I mentioned, it's quite nerve-wracking when you're checking your inbox almost every day, trying to see if you've got a response. Of course, there's a lot of forums out there where people are in the same boat as you. So I was part of many Reddit communities where we were tracking the status of our application. If, people have heard back from the SRA who are in the similar boat as myself. So that was quite a stressful time. But yes, I did get a response within a period of 6 months, which is, I think, the standard response time if you've submitted your SQE2 applications. It can take as little as a month or as long as 6 months. It really depends on what your route to qualification is. If, like Ingemar said, if you have an agreed exemption, it's much faster. If it is something that's being assessed on a case-by-case basis, they will look at your referee's letter. They will assess your job experience and your skills against SRA's predefined checklist. I think the 18 skills that you mentioned, Ingemar, do that assessment, and they do come back to you. I think what was interesting in the whole process was if they do think that there are gaps, they will reach out to you for further information. So I did have a caseworker from the SRA reach out to me regarding some details they needed on my referee, which my CEO again rightly agreed to. So that can happen in the review process. But I think my overall experience was very stressful, but I think Ingemar really helped in the process of just demystifying the whole thing for me. Working full time, having written the SQE1, you just want to get through the process and get done with it. But I think just having someone reassuring you that this is something that they can handle along with you and walk you through the process was really helpful for me. So a lot of gray areas on the SRA website, they aren't very clear about what's required and what's not required. So if you have someone who's helped lawyers like you before, if you have a qualifying work experience, or if you're already a qualified lawyer, I think just having someone who's helped many people before in the same boat as you can be very reassuring as you're going through that journey. That's a bit about me and my experience with the SQE2.
Thank you very much. Would you like to say a little bit about the experience of preparing for and sitting the SQE1? Because we may have people with us who have not done that and it's just a mystery to them.
Absolutely. So I wrote my SQE1 while having a full-time job at a company in London. So that was quite grueling. I think what was really important for me was consistency of studying every single day. So I would come back home by 6:37, pick my books up by 8 and dedicate, I think, 2 to 3 hours religiously every single day, whether it's the weekend, whether it's my birthday, whether I'm on holidays. I would carry all my luggage along with my books in my backpack on planes and be reading on the beach or wherever I was. So I think my biggest tip would be consistency and keeping up with all your exams, all your tests, all your practice series, and just digesting that information and internalizing it. And I think that's really important. the way the SQE1 is crafted, it's a very situational based exam. So they give you a situation and then they ask you to choose what's the most appropriate answer. And I think when you're doing it the first few times, all the answers seem correct. And that's the beauty of no, I guess. But then there would be a more appropriate or the most appropriate answer. I think it's about learning how to do that in a time-bound manner because you don't really have a lot of time on the test. And I think the more practice you get in, the better. Again, another tip from me would be never skip a practice. Even if you feel you're not prepared for it, just go give the test. Because I think it's a great way to put yourself in that situation and give the exam in exam conditions. So that's again something that's really important. I think it's very important also to have a good set of notes with you. So when it's a lot of volume because you're covering so many subjects. But I think it's really important to distill information from everything that you're studying, no matter what study material you're referring to, and have a solid set of notes that you can refer back to. Because a day or two before the exam, it's really impossible to go through all the books studied or the volumes of text that you've studied. But you need to have a solid set of notes, whether that's through flashcards, whether you have a study buddy, or whether that's through, common groups, forums, chats, discussions. Is really important to be organized through that whole process. But yes, I think consistency of studying every day, giving practice exams, as many as you can with as many providers and really doing it in exam conditions is crucial for cracking the SQE1. So I cracked my SQE1 in my first attempt. I scored around 77%, which is in the first quintile, which is one of the highest scores that you can score on the SQE1. And I think, having done that, I wouldn't want to do it again. And I don't wish it on anybody, but it's not impossible. It's definitely possible. It just requires discipline and consistency.
Well, thank you very much. That news directly from someone who's actually sat it, I think is really helpful. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn to the questions that people have been writing into the chat. And please do write them in and I'll work my way through answering them. Okay. Right. So what have we got in here? So thank you very much for the informative session. 3 questions from my side. So first of all, how much time would you recommend to dedicate for an in-house legal counsel with experience of 7 years in commodities training in order to prepare for SQE1? So how much time to prepare for the SQE1 exam? Well, I don't think that I'm particularly well suited to answer that, but maybe AK can.
Absolutely. So a bit of background. So I was in private practice before I gave the SQE1 and I specialize in PE and capital markets and they don't ask any of it. So they will not test you on your commodities training knowledge. They will test you on what knowledge a newly qualified solicitor should have on the first day of their job, which is a very broad spectrum of knowledge across various subjects of English law. So it could be wills, it could be property law, it could be basics of company law. So unless you have that foundational knowledge of English law, you will need to dedicate the time, irrespective of if you have subject matter expertise in a particular area of the law, irrespective of which jurisdiction you're in. So it really depends on how much of general English law knowledge you have of the subjects that are being tested on the SQE. So I think flipping through the books would be a good way to start off to see whether you're familiar with the subject matter or not. I think it gets much easier if you've done your undergraduate in the UK because then you're much familiar with the subjects. But if you're someone like me who studied abroad, done their LLB abroad, then it's definitely, all new for you. Again, if you're from common law jurisdictions, I think fundamental principles will be the same. But then again, you need to pick those books up, flip through it, and try and assess how much of it you're familiar.
Thank you. And just pick up what AK was saying earlier on. She was dedicating 2 to 3 hours a night. How much time you'll have to spend will depend so much on your own particular circumstances, how quickly you learn, how much you know already, and such like. But the SRA, when you're licensed, you're licensed. So they have to make sure that they're comfortable that you're safe to be let loose to practice in all sorts of different areas. So that's the best answer I'm afraid we can give, but it is always going to be down to the particular circumstances of the particular aspiring solicitor. I'll move on to the next question. Would the drafting, reviewing of contracts, advising on sanctions, ABC, AML, and other compliance matters be accepted as part of the QWE. Okay. So this is a question about what would be QWE. So would working with contracts and advising on compliance be QWE? Well, I'm now looking at someone who's not qualified as a lawyer, who then is not exempt from the requirement to have a minimum of 2 years full-time equivalent qualifying work experience confirmed to the SRA by an SRA regulated solicitor. Now, if you have someone in your organization, it will be their opinion because you'll be asking them to do that. If you were asking me as an external confirming solicitor, then my opinion, and remember it's me that's doing the confirmation to the SRA. So the SRA is listening to my justification. My view would be that those would be qualifying work experience. As I said, qualifying work experience is defined as the provision of legal services. Okay. So the drafting, revision, negotiating over contracts to me is very clearly the provision of legal services. Compliance, interesting point. So compliance could be qualifying work experience or it could not. It depends for me very much on how closely related it is to the law. If you're just doing the admin of checking people's ID, that's not the QWE. It's not the provision of legal services. It's a provision of administrative services. If, however, you are studying the law of data protection or financial crime in a country, various different jurisdictions, advising your company about how to be compliant, what applies and such like, maybe drafting up policies as well to make sure that does happen, then to me that is the provision of legal services because you're studying the law and then advising on it. So it does become quite case specific, person specific, but my general approach is that. Now you could speak to someone else, they'd have a different opinion. They're entitled to that because they have to justify their view to the SRA. There's no point you telling them what I say, it's their opinion. But my opinion, when I'm acting as an external confirming solicitor, is what I've just explained. That's my approach. I'll move on to the next question. Would a recommendation letter from a UK qualified solicitor be enough, or does it have to be a direct supervisor? So I think this relates to an application for exemption from the SQE2 exam, where you need to have someone who directly supervised you. So let me just paraphrase that. SQE2 exemption, letter of recommendation, does it have to be from someone who directly supervises you? And the answer is yes. Whether they're a UK qualified solicitor or not is not the relevant point. They have to be someone who directly supervised you. Now, as part of the requirements for that letter of reference, the SRA says that if they are qualified, then you'll need to submit with your application form proof of their qualification, which would be either a certificate of qualification or a certificate of good standing from their legal regulators. If they're not qualified as a lawyer, but they are qualified as a professional, then submitting proof of their professional qualifications. If they're not qualified as a professional, let's go back a little bit. If they're not qualified as a lawyer, then along with what I just said about any other qualifications, you need to include in the letter of reference, which you probably draft for them, an explanation as to how they were appropriate to directly supervise your legal work. Okay? Which is fine. CEO, done this for ages, blah, blah, blah. That might be enough justification. But you need to explain to the SRA. There are other things in that letter of reference which you need to do, like it needs to be on a headed paper and such like. So the SRA, as AK was saying before, can go back to them and ask them further questions. I think she said that they asked her CEO for more clarification. So they would proactively do that if they felt that there were other things that they needed to check on. Now, with regard to the exemptions from the SQE2, the default position for the SRA is if you don't meet the requirements, sit the exam. I didn't say before, but you can't apply for an exemption from the SQE2 if you have sat the SQE2 and failed it, because that's proof itself that you need to sit it and pass it. You shouldn't be exempted. So thank you for those questions, really helpful. Next question, how long does it take this apprenticeship? So let me paraphrase that. How long is the apprenticeship for a graduate solicitor or graduate aspiring solicitor. There's no definite period because it depends how long it takes for you to study well enough to be able to sit the exam, both exams, okay? But it's likely, I think, to take, 2 to 4 years is my guess. But you're best asking the people who are on the apprenticeship training approved list, University of Law, BPP, and there's another one, the name of which escapes me, that I just learned about recently. They would know best, but they won't want you to sit the exam until they feel you're comfortable that you've got a good chance of passing it. So it may take longer for some people than others with the apprenticeship. Okay. So there's no set figure of how long it would take for you to go through the apprenticeship and pass the exams. I'm going to move on to the next question. Please, could you share the actual link to the apprenticeship here or in an email? So what I would do is I'm going to put my article about that here. You can read it. You've got a copy. Then I'll just put it into the link. So this isn't really a question and answer. It's just, there you go. There's a link to the page. I will be putting these links onto a post on LinkedIn tomorrow. The apprenticeship, someone would need to approach the University of Law, BPP, and the other people who I can't remember at the moment. It would be your employer who approaches them. So find them through the website and asks them about an apprenticeship, and they will then take you through that. There's no central body just to do this. It's the organizations you need to contact, and they're approved by the apprenticeship organization, which is part of the government, to then administer that process. Okay, let's go back up to the next question. As a foreign lawyer, will exemption of training contract, as I understand, is right? Let me paraphrase that. So can you be exempted from the training contract if you are a foreign qualified lawyer? I'm hoping I'm paraphrasing that correctly. So, right, I think we're mixing up two different routes to qualifying. The training contract is part of the LPC. Under the LPC route, you have to pass the LPC exam and get a training contract with a law firm, after which the law firm would say, yes, you passed your training contract. We say that you now can qualify, and that's that. Under the SQE, there is no such thing as a training contract. Although you may find in real life that a law firm says, we're going to put you on a training contract. They're calling a period of employment a training contract, but it has no particular meaning with the SRA. Now, during that period of employment, you may acquire your qualifying work experience, and they may say it's got to be 2 years with us. But you might, for example, have 12 months QWE already confirmed through a previous period of employment. So you could, halfway through that period of employment with this new law firm, have completed your qualifying work experience. And you could ask them then to confirm that. And they may say no, in which case you have a problem because they are not doing what their regulator says. The SRA has been very clear to say that solicitors should confirm qualifying work experience unless they have a jolly good reason not to. And ultimately, the SRA say this is a ethical issue which you can take to SRA ethics to get their assistance with. Now, there's all sorts of other factors that play into that, but yeah, so I hope that is helpful with regards to that. So under the SQE, but if you're saying you're a fully qualified lawyer, the qualifying work experience period is you're exempt from it. Now, what an employer says you have to do is a different thing. That's employment law, and whether you're employed with it, would stay employed with them or not. But a foreign qualified lawyer is exempt from the qualifying work experience requirement, definitely. Next question. Can you provide us with a link to apply for the SQE1 and SQE2 exemptions? Not really. The SQE1 exemption is if you have passed your LPC and you simply submit proof of that through your MySRA profile. That's your profile that you create on the SRA website. The SQE2 exemption, I can put a link in here to my guidance on that, which I will put into the chat. But I'll also upload into LinkedIn tomorrow. So you've got that in there, and it's visible on our website. So if I just scroll to the top here, you can see QWE, etc., and there it is. Okay, let's go back to the questions. So, thank you, Akanksha. Do you still need to pass the SQE1 if qualified from a different country? I can answer that question, yes. So, question, do you get exemption from the SQE1 if you're a foreign qualified lawyer? No, you don't. The only way you're going to get exemption from the SQE1 is if you have passed the LPC. Less and less people will have that. Most people will have to sit and pass the SQE1. If you are qualified in a different country as a lawyer, you may apply for exemption from SQE2 and you will be exempt from the QWE requirement. Next question. Thank you, very informative. Question for AK. I have heard horror stories about how the practice questions on the SRA website are nowhere near the level of difficulty expected in the exam. Which exam preparation provider would you recommend? So let me paraphrase that. Let's say, can you recommend an SQE training provider and as a supplemental of the practice questions to the same level as the exam itself? AK, I'll let you answer that.
Absolutely. So I went with Barbary for my SQE1 prep, and they were really good. I think there were other providers as well who were really good based on the feedback I have received. So I think there's QLDS School and a few others out there. But I think why I chose Barbary was because they had 2 big fat books and that's it. You just study those 2 big fat books and you're fine. I think that was really helpful because they concised a lot of information in those books, but it's a lot of information. So like I mentioned, you need to make your notes. And I think that practice test series are also really great. On the second question about the level of practice questions on the SRA website, yes, it's very simple on the website. It's nowhere close to what the real exam would be. But then the SRA website questions are just indicative. So they're supposed to give you a feel of what the questions may look like, but it doesn't give you a feel of the difficulty level. And again, the questions you will face in the exam will be a mix of easy, medium to difficult questions. And I think the best way to get an experience of that is to go through simulated practice tests by one of these providers. And that's the only way you'll get a look and feel of those. But I think it's also about the stress of the examination when you're sitting the exam, which makes everything probably appear a bit more difficult than what it really is. So practice the questions in exam conditions. I think that's also very important.
Thank you very much. That's really, really good answer. I'm going to move on to the next question. So just summarizing this here. So who would be the SQE2 exemption application? Who would be the referee for a partner in a law firm? So we've got here, I'm a foreign qualified lawyer and equity partner in a law firm applying for individual exemption from the SQE2. Who would be the referee considering that I have been practicing 10 years plus as a partner? So I do know what the SRA would say on this. Early on, when I was helping people who were applying for exemption from the SQE2, I had someone who was Turkish, who qualified as a New York attorney, and then had gone off to practice on his own. He didn't have anyone who who was his supervisor, who had directly supervised his work. I asked the SRA, they said, well, if there's no supervisor, you can't meet the requirements for the exemption. You'll have to sit and pass the SQE2 exam. So it is a question of thinking really hard. If there is anyone who you could say has directly supervised your work. Now, I was a partner in a law firm. There might be someone to whom I would refer and would check my work and I would check their work. Indeed, the SRA is quite keen on that sort of thing. I remember the senior partner might overlook the managing partner's work and vice versa. So there's some sort of appeal process for a client. But if in truth there is no one who has directly supervised your work, you can't apply for the exemption from the SQE2. I'm sorry, it's just the rules. Let's move on to the next question. As an Indian qualified advocate, I've gained post-qualification experience for a year and a half and multiple internships at law firms in both court practice, litigation, non-litigation. I've now been volunteering with Citizens Advice in England since I moved here. Am I okay to submit a combination of the above for the SQE2 exemption. So can a combination of work amount to what is required for an SQE2 exemption? The answer is yes, it can, so long as it meets a requirement. And one of the things the SRA is keen for you to have is for the work to be of the level of your qualification. So if it says, okay, fine, you're let's say a Pakistani qualified advocate, the wording of the SRA website is saying post-qualification as a Pakistani advocate, which is ambiguous. So does it mean post your qualification as a Pakistani advocate, or does it mean working as a Pakistani advocate? Now, the SRA, I've asked them, have fudged it slightly. So that's good. There's a little bit of flexibility. So if you can, in your letter of reference, your referee is saying, well, although maybe you were working in England, you're working to the level of a Pakistani advocate, then that probably is going to help you. However, if you're working in England as a paralegal, even though you were qualified as a lawyer in another jurisdiction, that won't count towards your requirement for that period of legal post-qualification legal work experience. So I hope that general guidance helps you to apply across a number of situations. Next question. How does the SRA consider qualified lawyers from Eastern Europe? We do not have a specific separation as a solicitor. We have lawyers who completed their degrees, and in a diploma it said that you are a qualified lawyer and you can work as a lawyer unless you want to represent your client in court and you need then to become an advocate. Can you please clarify, do I need to be an advocate in Eastern Europe, for instance, if I would like to apply for the SQE2 exemption? Very good question. I have 1 or 2 articles on our website about this point because as I was helping people, this became apparent as a problem. So let me just paraphrase this. SQE2 exemption. Do I need to be a full advocate, or will being a lawyer from passing a degree should be sufficient? Okay. And this is something that particularly affects post-Soviet Union countries. So Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Russia, but also some Eastern European countries. I can't remember if Poland applies, but interestingly, Scandinavia has a similar sort of thing where you have qualified as a jurist, but they don't necessarily have rights of audience in the courts. You have to go through a separate set of exams. Now, the people who just passed their law degree and therefore can practice in many areas of law don't, in many countries, have a professional body to whom you can apply to get proof of the qualification. And the SRA has said, that's okay, but because you don't have the full rights of qualification, and you may recall that I showed you those different practice areas beforehand, you will have to complete Section 8 of the application form, which involves you putting together a dossier of evidence, so actual documentation, which you can redact, which needs to be referenced back against the competencies listed in Section 8, and the people who write your letters of reference, that it'll need to be cross-referenced in their letters as well. And then the SRA is going to go through that dossier together with the application and the letters and go through all of that. So it's harder for you to get the exemption, but not impossible. But yeah, so I'm afraid that's the situation that we have there. I hope that gives you some clarity in that. Other questions? And we come to the last question. Is the English language certificate a mandatory requirement if you've graduated abroad? And is it ESOL or B1? I don't know about the ESOL or B1, but I can tell you about the English language certificate. So let me just paraphrase that. Is proving your English proficiency a mandatory requirement of the SQE? In an answer, yes. The SRA wants to make sure that people whom they license as English solicitors can speak and write English to a high level, because you're giving very detailed legal advice. Well, you will be. That's what they're licensing you to do. It may well be that's taken as read because you passed a degree in England or in the English language, which can be evidenced. But it is within the gift of the SRA to ask you to prove your English language competence. Now, if you have got an exemption from the SQE2 and you just sat a multiple choice SQE1, you're more likely to be asked to prove your competence in the English language, okay? Because they haven't got much to go on. If you've sat the SQE2, there's much more language involved, and they get a good look at you and can form their own view that you're competent in the English language. So if you've got an exemption from the SQE2 and you're foreign qualified, it's more likely that they might ask you to give them some reassurance that you're competent in the English language. But if you are, it shouldn't be a big deal. It should be pretty straightforward to do. Okay, now then, I've got some more questions that have come in, so let's scroll down to those. Okay, this is a question for Akanksha. So what are the documents that you have to obtain from India as an Indian qualified lawyer, presumably in order to get qualification as an English solicitor?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most difficult step of this entire process. So if in the UK, which is why it was a bit more harder. So if I recall back, I think I needed first to obtain a certificate of good standing from my local bar council. So my local bar council is the Bar Council of Karnataka. So which is the in-person process, because I think most bar councils in India don't have an online portal you can apply this from. So it required, someone to physically go there and apply it on us. And I think there's a requirement that the certificate of good standing needs to be dated in the last 3 months. That becomes quite tricky if you have to fly into the country and get that certificate of good standing and convince the bar council to give it to you. So that's one, that's a whole advance. Then I think there was another one around a police verification, which is a local police station to verify and checks you. This depends on how long you've stayed in India versus how long you've stayed in the UK. I think the SRA looks back 5 years. And for me personally, I was just short of 5 years by 1 year. So I had to prove 4 years of police verification in the UK, which was a very swift process because it was just all online through Atlantic data. But then 1 year of Indian police verification, which again required me to go in person to my local police station and convince the officer to give me the certificate, which is again quite the advantage. Practicing. Once you apply for admission, then at that time you again need to provide a certificate of good standing. It's 2 times in the process that I had to provide this. And again, this is something that needs to be dated in the last 3 months. So it was twice me going and knocking on my local state bar council to get the certificate. The police verification for my English language, I think somebody asked this question. I did my master's in the so I think if you do your master's in the UK, it's graded as a level 7 or equivalent qualification. And hence, I just submitted that as my English language proof. So that was, again, a document I had to submit. If you have not done your master's in the UK, they'd probably ask you to take either the IELTS or some equivalent English language test to prove that. But again, check what you need there on the website. But yeah, these are a few of the things that to provide to the SRA.
Thank you very much. Always a challenge when you've got to go back to another country to get what they need. Right. We've got another question here. Is there a time limit on how back can I look for a referee? Okay, let me paraphrase what I think you're asking. So SQE2 exemption, how far back can I go for my legal work experience? And you can go back as far as you want, as long as you can find the person who directly supervised your work, and they don't have to still to be working. They could be working in another company. That's absolutely fine. The SRA has confirmed to me that it's fine as long as you get what they're writing on headed paper. The reason why is so the SRA can contact them and ask them questions if they need to. So you can go back as far as you want for the person who directly supervised your legal work. So you can also, if it's QWE, as someone who's not qualified. There are more challenges with the QWE side of things, but I won't go into that now because I think this question related to the SQE2 exemption. Okay, we've got one here, so about the SQE1 exemption. So I'll just clarify that. So when can you get an exemption from the SQE1 exam? Okay, 2 circumstances. One, which is the easy one, a straightforward one, you have passed your LPC under the old scheme and you want to trade your LPC pass against an exemption from the SQE1. and you simply upload it through your MySRA profile, and then you're likely to have that granted to you. And incidentally, the SRA is very unlikely to grant you exemption from both exams. I've even heard of people who have got the exemption from the SQE 1 because of passing the LPC, have then applied because they're a foreign qualified lawyer for exemption from the SQE 2, and their exemption from the SQE 1 exam has been revoked. So, tells you something about that. Now, the second circumstance when you can apply for exemption from the SQE 1 is if you fill in the exemption form that I was showing you earlier, sections 5 and 6, as well as 1, 2, 3, and 4, together with your huge dossier of paperwork mapped against all their requirements, and you submit all of that. And as I said, the SRA told me they've only ever granted that to one person. So yes, theoretically, you could get an exemption that way. I think the likelihood is vanishingly small. It'd probably be easier to actually sit the exam than do all that, I think. Next question. Congratulations. This isn't the question. This is congratulations on becoming a solicitor Akanksha. So my question to Ingemar, if you are a qualified lawyer in another country, e.g. India, but have work experience in another field, journalism, which is not direct legal work experience, would I still be qualified for the SQE 2 exemption? Since you mentioned if you are a qualified advocate in another country, that is enough for exemption. Let me summarize that. SQE 2 exemption would work in another field of work qualify as legal work experience for the exemption. And I think it's probably not going to, because it has to be legal work experience. So you said journalism here. You've got to somehow satisfy the SRA that journalism is legal work experience. And it's feasible if you're working for a newspaper, you're working as in-house legal counsel. So the work has to be legal work experience. So work in another area, journalism, I don't know, stock market trader or something like that is not legal work experience. So it won't count towards the exemption from the SQE 2. Right. Next question. So for an SQE 2 exemption, the SRA requires practice in probate if someone has worked in-house such as Akanksha. So let me summarize that. SQE 2 exemption, will the SRA accept in-house legal work? And the answer is yes, they will. They don't have a problem with that at all. The legal work experience for the SQE 2 exemption does not have to be in any specifically specified areas. Many people, if you look at it in reality, work in a niche. They specialize in that. Now, in the exam, which was the SQE 1, which you had passed, or will have to sit, because you can apply for your SQE 2 exemption even before you sit the SQE 1. But you will, in the SQE 1, have to cover all of those areas and pass them. If you have legal work experience in a specific area which doesn't cover all of the other areas, that's not a problem as far as the SQE 2 exemption is concerned. I've helped many people who had been granted exemption from the SQE 2 who specialize in a particular area. That's the examples they put in their letter of exemption in support of the exemption application are in their practice area, and that's been fine for the SRA. And we've got a further question here. So did I understand that yes. So we do not help with people with the exemption from the SQE 2 where it involves Section 8. I just took a commercial decision on that. However, if you are Eastern European qualified and need to complete Section 8, contact me directly. I have someone to whom I could refer you who has been successful and can share their experience. So email me on LinkedIn for that. Will a recording of this webinar be distributed to attendees? Only if you ask. So message me, email me, or message me on LinkedIn, and I can then send you the link where you can download this recording from Zoom. We will process it and put it onto YouTube, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, but that may take a couple of weeks, but then it will be available for anyone to access. Okay, right. We have a question here. Where can you buy a good set of notes for the SQE 2? Back to the page or the training providers, Akanksha. I don't know if you have any view on that one.
No, I just made my own notes. I think it's best if you make your own notes.
Yeah. And this is SQE too, which you didn't sit anyway.
No, I
So
didn't. So yeah.
I think, yeah, go to the exam providers. There are people who sat the exams who then are selling their notes and books and things on various Facebook and other forums and things like that in groups. But I would endorse what Akanksha said as well. My way of learning is that I digest it, write my own notes. If you're borrowing someone else's, it's secondhand. I'm not sure if it's going to be that helpful. That's the best advice I can give. Right. We have here, I see many Ukrainian lawyers with just Ukrainian legal diplomas without passing the SQE, GDL, etc., become solicitors. Is it any specific SRA way of Ukrainian lawyers that we are not aware? If yes, can other nationalities use the same strategy? I'm not quite sure how to summarize that. All I can say is I don't know of any way that anyone is granted any exemption. So this is news to me, and I'd be concerned if that's the case, because then you would have people who you'd have two levels of solicitors, ones who are properly qualified and those who've been given a pass. I don't think that's safe for the public. So this is news to me. I don't know about this, and I can't answer the question. There's no point putting a request on here for the recording because there's too much else going on, I'm afraid. So please, could you message me on LinkedIn if you would like a copy of the recording, or email? Okay. I think we've actually reached the end of the questions at this point, unless there's anyone else. Last call for questions. I know we've been talking for a long time. I've done my best to get clear answers. It is possible to reach out to me direct for, a consultation specifically about your circumstances, but I hope I've given you enough information to be able to take things forward yourselves. So just again, the website here, you've got at the bottom of every page, you'll see how can we help you. You can fill in information, requests in there, and we'll be happy to help. And I will be putting links up onto LinkedIn tomorrow of those pages and resources that I've shared. So I hope that's of help to you. Do feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tell other people about that. And so come to the end of the evening and wish you a good evening and good luck on your journey to qualifying as solicitors. Thank you again also to Akanksha for her time. That's been very kind of you.
Absolutely. All the best, guys.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.